G'day everybody, how are we doing today? This is my channel, Fix Australia's Bush, and I am Lucius Adams, a young bloke who loves to four-wheel drive and get into adventure. Today, we're going to be going through a video of my front auto locker, or an honest review of it. I'm going to tell you the pros, the cons, the myths, and all the misconceptions to do with the locker, and what your decision should be, and my final thoughts of it. I've had it in my car for about 40,000 Ks on the front diff of my RG Colorado. I'm going to talk to you about advice and everything else to do with it. Okay, so the pros of the auto locker is, well, it gives 50-50 drive to both wheels. It locks the differential up so it does not slip or lose traction on rutty hills or any type of climb at all. It is fantastic at true locking, and it does not slip unlock. Another pro is it is completely mechanical. So as I mean by mechanical, there is no wires, cables or air lines that need to be run to the diff. It is a completely sealed in unit, and it just replaces the spider gears within the differential, alright, so making it a completely automatic locking system. It does unlock, and I'll explain that system to you later, but right now we'll keep going on to pros. Another pro is it will prevent damages. So what it does is, because you can crawl everything with a very low RPM, well, it prevents a lot of breakages. I used to snap a lot of CVs in four-wheel drive because I absolutely had to plant my foot into the ground just to get it up some small moderate hills, just because I was fully unlocked. Okay. And when I install the locker, it is amazing how much traction you gain in the front of your vehicle or the rear, wherever you decide to put it, and you'll be able to crawl up any hill, climb or even sand dune with ease with the locker. So I cannot complain about the traction you'll receive from the front auto locker. Another benefit is, well, you have an immense amount of traction. You'll never ever run out of traction. You can go anywhere. It makes full driving super easy. You can crawl everything. My car will barely, if I'm doing a crawl up a hill, it will barely go over 1200 revolutions. I won't have any issues. It will just idle up everything. Make your mates wonder what's going on. Now, there's a lot of other pros, but they're a bit smaller. They're the major ones. You can crawl everything. You have amazing traction. Alright, and also it is extremely cheap. You can get them for very cheap. They're quite easy to install, and they prevent a lot of breakages. But there is cons to the locker, and I do want to talk about them so people understand what the cons are. Alright, the cons of the auto locker is, well, you can't really control it. Once you're in four-wheel drive, well, it won't really unlock. It's constantly locked. That's how it works. And I'll explain that to you later as well. But a con is, well, you have no control when you want to unlock it and relock it. Alright, it is always doing what it wants. It is a mechanical locker. It runs on its own system. Okay. Another con is you may break more components. So I know that counteracts what I said with the pros, but you may actually break more components, right, if it's not set up right. And I'll also talk about that soon as well, when I talk about the myths and misconceptions and advice on if you're going to install one. Another one is you will make your steering a fair bit heavier and noticeably heavier. So a thing is, with the auto locker, Ford system has advertised it as uninterrupted steering, and I disagree. You will not feel uninterrupted steering, because it's locked. You will feel that you don't have differential movement, so your wheels will be extremely hard to turn. Your wheels will be extremely hard to turn, and it won't be extremely hard, but it will be quite tight, especially when you're going around tight corners. It will feel really tight, and it'll be quite hard to turn. So you're going to have to get used to doing maybe a couple of 3-point turns on the tracks if you're in four-wheel drive. Okay, but in two-wheel drive, you won't feel it that much at all. Another con is you may do more tie rods as well. People have been contacting me a lot about tie rods and CVs, but I'll talk about CVs soon. Tie rods, it won't cause tie rod breakages in itself, but the only reason you'll break more tie rods with an auto locker is because you're putting your car in ridiculously hard tracks and you're gonna bend tie rods sooner or later, especially if you've got a really weak front end like my collie here with IFS. It's not very strong, alright? So there is a fair lot of pros and cons, but like with every locker there is always cons with it. It's just you gotta weigh up what works for you. Okay. The myths with the locker, I get a lot of misconceptions when I tell people I have an auto locker. A lot of people will tell me things that aren't true about the locker. There's a lot of common ones, and I want to go through them because maybe you're thinking the same. This is what I thought when I brought it, and I just bit the bullet and I did it. And yeah, I'll tell them about it. The most common one I get is, doesn't it just lock up when you slip out of traction? No. So a locker is actually an auto unlocker. So what it does is when you're on the track, when you're in full drive, it is locked. That's all it is, it's locked. It only unlocks when you relieve your foot off the accelerator and you turn the wheel. That's when it will allow differential movement. When there's no engine power going to the differentials, you will hear it go click, 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 click. It will make a clicking noise. That's it ratcheting over its gears, and it will allow differential movement. But once you apply the pressure on the accelerator, it will re-lock and you will have full lock diff again. So there's something to get used to on the tracks, but no, because a lot of people think when you're climbing a hill and one wheel goes in there, it automatically just locks up and then you get drive again. No, it doesn't work like that. It works the opposite. Once you relieve pressure and it needs differential movement, then it will unlock, but only when your foot's off the accelerator. Another misconception is it directly causes more CV breakages. No. CVs only break from a few things. Number one is shock loading. A CV will only break if you absolutely shock load it. So when a wheel's in the air and it's getting spun really hard, especially on an open diff, and it gets crashed on the ground. Very common when you have rear lockers, because your rear is going to be dragging it through, but your front is still slamming on the ground. So that's why I agree that front is better, but I'll talk about that later. But when your rear is pushing up the front and your front slams on the ground while you're having a lot of wheel speed, it can quite shock load the axle because it's a sudden amount of traction. It shock loads through the whole driveline, and usually your weakest component is either your hub or your CV. A hub is not hard to change, but a CV can be a bit of a pain. It can be a game breaker if you don't know how to fix it or you don't have a spare. So there is a lot of things you got to consider. But that's one way a CV breaks. Another way CV breaks is excessive binding. So I had that issue when I had my collie. It wasn't really set up well, so I had spaces, and with the Colorados, a diff drop actually causes more binding than relieves it. So what happened was I had binding, and when I first put my locker in, I was driving ruts, and I could actually hear it, the axle binding up when it was full droop. And what happened was when it fully articulated up, because the locker was still forcing drive on the wheels, doing the job, it exploded the CV. Now I know that sounds scary, but it was actually because of binding. I found out when I jacked the car up and I tried to turn the wheel, the wheels were completely locked up, and I couldn't turn the wheels at all. And that's in two-wheel drive, mind you. So even in car parks, if I hit a bump hard enough, I'd hear it bind up. So I relieved that. I found out what it was the diff drop, and I removed the diff drop and lowered the suspension from the 4-inch with the spacers to a 2-inch lift on 33s, and I haven't had issues ever since. Alright, so definitely make sure you have zero binding within your axles. Right, but yes, the diff locker won't contribute or save your CVs, but if you have a bad setup and you have binding issues, excessive lift, or you have a bad right foot, you're going to break things. That's just the fact, but it will actually save things. You never drive it. I'm running aftermarket CVs, and I haven't broke a CV ever since I've fixed all my issues. The car runs and drives really well off-road. So yeah. Another misconception is beach runs. It's going to get confused on the beach. This is the same as I was talking before about it unlocking and relocking. On the beach most of the time, you're not going to relieve your foot off the throttle. most of the time it's going to remain locked. It's going to feel a bit different to drive on the sand because it's going to not want to, especially if you're on like a hill surface with your car, you're going to feel like your wheels are going to be turned like this because it's locked. There's no differential movement. It's going to feel a bit weird, but it will drive really well on the sand. I've never had an issue with it. I do be cautioning you, if you're driving on the beach and you're like turning turning real sharp, I would recommend that you turn reverse and then straight up the dunes or something like that, because you're locked. The turning circle element is obviously severely affected. It's even worse if you've got bigger tyres. You're trying to drive, you won't turn real nice. So you should really not full lock it. So I would avoid full locking it with the locker on. You can try to speed up, release throttle and turn and then reapply throttle. If the sand is hard enough, definitely, but if you've got real soft sand like we do in WA here, the sand, you'll just give way and you definitely won't be able to turn that corner. So I definitely recommend doing 2 laps. Another thing to consider, another misconception as well, is that the locker it's unpredictable. It's not unpredictable, guys. The locker is extremely reliable and extremely predictable to understand once you understand it, and I hope I explained it to you well enough. So yeah, again, throttle on, lock is on. Throttle's off, the locker is disengaged, it is unlocked. It is something to get used to on the tracks. I would recommend every time you're down a hill, just throw it back in 2-wheel drive and drive the track sensibly in 2-wheel drive, and when you hit a hill, put it back in 4-wheel drive. Okay. Advice for suspension or setting up your car to run a locker. There is a few things I do recommend you do. First things first is get spares, because you're most likely getting a locker to achieve harder tracks and to make your hard tracks easier and do really good tracks. You still have a chance of breaking CVs. You can still shock load a CV, you can still bind up a CV with an auto locker regardless if it's unlocked or not. I would severely recommend that you have at least 1 spare axle, 1 tyre rod, and then the rack end itself. I reckon they're your 3 major spares you should add if you don't have them already on your list. Know your limits, but understand that you're playing a hard full run game. You may break axles. Do be prepared for that. Other things I should recommend with IFS vehicles, if you're going to put a locker in it, even unlocked, whatever, you should never go over 2.5 inch to 3 inch lift. It depends on the vehicle. Every car's different, so do your research. Honestly, guys, you don't need more than a 3 inch lift, a 2 to 3 inch lift. I run a 2 inch lift on 33s and I scrub at nothing at all. I've had really good articulation and I've got 0 bind in the axles. The car just drives really well, it's comfortable and it's still legal in regards to lift. I wouldn't recommend running a big lift. With a 2 inch lift, do you need a diff drop? Not really. I wouldn't recommend doing a diff drop unless you really need it. But make sure your car doesn't bind like mine does. With other cars, you can get away with the Hiluxes. I know the Navaras get away with it. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend putting a diff drop if you don't have to. It's not really worth it. Just keep the CVs how they are. They're just fine. Other mods, there's not really other ones. Just learn how to drive it. Learn how to negotiate tracks. Understand that your car will become very capable. Another question I get as well is, should you run front or rear lockers? I wanted to throw this in because a lot of people do ask me that as well. I get a lot of DMs asking, should I run front or rear lockers? My opinion, this is my opinion, so don't attack me, is I always prefer a front locker. With what I've seen and what there's benefits of both. I will do a separate video one day on positive and negatives of both. Obviously being twin lock is your best option, but if you had to pick one, I would definitely recommend the front, especially on an IFS, because IFSs don't flex much in the front. You can definitely harness a lot of traction on the tracks with just one front locker, because when you climb a hill, that locker is carrying you up. The rear has more flex, so usually it has more traction anyway. Alright, so usually that's kind of ready getting dry of what your front is really lacking usually. That's what always made me lack up in full drives. So I went and opted for the front. Right, now if you can twin lock it, I definitely recommend twin locking it, but that's not really possible. Alright, with the rear locker, it torques full drives over a lot, because if your wheel's in a rut and your front's in the air, it will tend to torque the vehicle up. I've never had this vehicle torque. Every time it drives, it always remains very level. So yeah, if you did want to go rear, I would not recommend an auto locker. Americans love the auto locker in the rear of their vehicles, but in Australia, a lot of Australians say no, and I agree, because the rear of your vehicle, well, it's always on. You're driving on bituminous road locked. The only time it will unlock is if you relieve the throttle. Now, I can tell you now, most drivers don't release the throttle completely when going around a roundabout, because to unlock the diff in the rear, no, that's not really going to work. It's going to click and clack, it's going to be crap, and if you apply the throttle while turning, it's going to completely lock the wheels up and you'll start chirping the wheels. I would not recommend an auto locker in the rear. I recommend a proper locker in the rear, but an auto locker in the front is definitely needed. Another question I get as well is, do you need manual locking hubs? Manual locking hubs on full drives, some cars you can upgrade, like mine you can. Is it really required? Can you do it with auto hubs? And yes, you can do it with auto hubs. A lot of people told me, no, you cannot use an auto locker with auto hubs. You said it will bind everything up and it will damage components. And I can tell you now, I've never had a single issue with the front end with binding or anything, or any noises. Dual drive, it's unrecognisable. It does click a little bit on sharp turns, like in car park or turning into my driveway at home. You will hear a slight little click, but honestly, it's not even worth the point. Main locking hubs are better because it frees the CVs up and you won't have any interruptions from the locker, but really you do not need manual locking hubs. Alright, but make sure that you don't buy it for your car if you have full-time full drive. I do want to put that in, but full drive systems will tell you that if you do buy it. Other than that, guys, what are my thoughts on the auto locker? I love my auto locker. The traction on it is unreal. It makes driving tracks just so much easier. If you're looking to keep your car challenging, I wouldn't recommend buying it then, because, well, some people love just an unlock challenge, and, well, every time you're in full drive, well, you've got it locked. It's always locked, you're always capable. So yeah, I do recommend it if you're willing to make the sacrifices to make it work. I would recommend it, yes. If you have the money and you can afford air lockers, I definitely recommend air lockers, because then you have control. So when you're on the beach, you actually can be unlocked, and stuff like that, and you can hit full high on dirt roads without the locker being a pain. But I wouldn't recommend e-lockers. I've heard too many bad stories, especially from Tyler Thompson. He did a really good video on the e-lockers having a lot of issues with unlocking in reverse, wiring issues, unlocking out of nowhere. It's just not worth it. So either get air lockers, or if you want to be on a budget, or you want something that's quite reliable, because they are very reliable, the auto lockers, get an auto locker in the front, worth every cent. Alright guys, that's really it. If you got any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to answer as much as I can to the best of my ability. No, I'm not a mechanic, but I hope this did really well for you. Please subscribe. I've got heaps of trips coming up on my channel. I'm going to post them all. We're going to have a good time. We're going to go out full driving, and we're doing a video this